My name is Jack Sprengel, and I am the curator here at the Seabees Museum and Memorial Park. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening as part of the North Kingstown 350th anniversary celebration. I was the last Seabees stationed here. I closed the base in 1994. I enlisted in the Seabees in 1974 as a construction electrician, and I worked my way up through the ranks and received a commission as a chief warrant officer in the Civil Engineer Corps. And then, as I stated, I had the dubious honors of pulling the flag down and closing the logbook and locking the gate. And then I retired and raised my family here in North Kingstown. And they've gone on to future things in their lives. And I'm still here and been at the museum building this place for 26 years. I'd like to recognize Joe Fergan in the back. He is the president. And he's got his sidekick right there, Dave. He's the operations and maintenance director here at the museum. And just to let everybody know that everybody here is a volunteer. Nobody here gets a paycheck. We receive no federal funding, no state funding. We've done all of this on our own as veterans. Okay? So, without further ado, my presentation tonight, things have been kind of changed a little bit, so I'm going to speak to everybody this evening about Operation Deep Freeze. Does anybody know anything about deep freeze? Well, it's about this cold place on the bottom of the planet, Antarctica. And Seabees had the great honor of being deployed there, okay? Not like me, I went to Iceland twice, so I didn't get to go to Antarctica. But in 1954, the President of the United States went ahead and agreed to go ahead and support the scientific exploration of Antarctica. So unfortunately, or fortunately enough, and you have to forgive me because I was an old Navy instructor, so I like to walk it back and forth and make sure all my students in the class were watching me, and then I could tell nobody was sleeping. So I have that bad habit of going back and forth. So the President of the United States agreed to the scientific world that they would go ahead and support their endeavors to go to Antarctica. So they needed to find a military organization to go ahead and support that. Well, we had a Navy Admiral, Mr. Byrd, who also had already done some exploration in the Arctic. So that honor fell upon the Navy Civil Engineer Corps, and they're the builders and maintenance folks for the U.S. Navy. And back then it was under a department called the Bureau of Yards and Docks. So the Navy was contacted by the President, and the Bureau of the Yards and Docks and the Civil Engineer Corps officers and the Seabees were tasked with supporting this mission to go to Antarctica. So actually, they went down there and started construction in 1955. But the Navy formed what was called a Special Mobile Construction Battalion. So the Seabees are made up of construction battalions, construction battalion maintenance units, special battalions, and things of this nature. But this one was a special battalion, and their whole mission was to go ahead and perform this construction down in Antarctica. So in February of '55, the special battalion was actually formed and started right here in Davisville. From there, they went ahead and went through technical assistance to the Bureau of Yards and Docks for maintenance of stations down in Antarctica. MCB Special's first deployment, like I said, was in 1955, and they went down to build two stations. One in Carrion Bay, which was known as Little America, and the other one they built was actually at McMurdo Island. The battalion wintered over at these two stations and built bird and pole stations during Deep Freeze 2, and that was in 1956 to 1957, right around the same time I was born, so I'm letting the cat out of the bag. All this construction was done under severe conditions. Temperatures would drop to 100 degrees below zero. And we didn't have a lot of special clothing back then either. You can go look in that case later on tonight, and you can see some of the boots and foul weather gear that the Seabees had to wear under those conditions. At the start of the International Geophysical Year in '57, facilities were ready, and the battalion's mission had become station maintenance. So it went from construction and building those two stations to now maintaining them as all the scientists went down to Antarctica. Then they went on and they went into what they called Deep Freeze 3 and Deep Freeze 4, which were primarily the missions to go ahead and resupply and keep things operational down there. And they had actually planned that this would only go on for so many years, and actually Deep Freeze 4 would be the closing of the operation. Well, however, things worked out so well that the scientific group and the community went ahead and actually approached the U.S. government and asked that they not stop the program. So the President of the United States did a little discussion with Congress and everybody, and they went ahead and said, okay, we will continue to fund the operation. So in 1959, NMCB, or the Construction Battalion Special, was replaced by what was called the Antarctic Support Activities. And again, that was formed here in Davisville, Rhode Island. That same year, a detachment known as Alpha was established here, and they were known to be formed to serve as the winter over organization. So in the summer period and the good weather, the battalion or the Antarctic Support Group would go down, and Detachment Alpha would relieve them, and they would stay there during the winter season when supplies could not get in and out. And that was their mission, was to keep the base operational. Okay. Everybody else would get to come home and see their families and enjoy the summer, while these guys were down there freezing. Beginning in 1960, deep freeze operations were named at this point now after the fiscal year. During Deep Freeze 60, NMCB 6 built a new above-ground station on the Palmer Peninsula, and the following year built the first highway in Antarctica. They also went ahead in 62, saw the construction of the first nuclear power plant, which a lot of people didn't know was down there. But the Seabees and the Army Corps of Engineers actually built the first nuclear power plant in Antarctica, and then the Navy actually operated, and Civil Engineer Corps officers operated the nuclear power plant in Antarctica. The PM-3A reactor supplied 60 million kilowatt hours of electricity and 13 million gallons of potable water produced from seawater to McMurdo Station between 1962 and 1974, when it was finally shut down. Today, you can go and see the actual power plant control panel in the official U.S. Navy Seabee Museum out in California. During Deep Freeze 67, a newly established CB unit, Naval Construction Battalion Unit 201, they keep, as time changes, they keep forming these new organizations to take over responsibilities. During 67, a new unit was formed. It was Naval Construction Battalion Unit 201, and it joined the Naval Support Force for Antarctica. Prior to 67, regular battalions on a rotating basis had deployed to Antarctica. However, the Navy decided that a unit specialized solely for Arctic construction would be more effective in the usual hostile environment that exists in the South Pole. 100 degrees below zero. Can you just fathom that? The major problem that plagued the Seabees on the unit was the lack of sufficient construction time because of the seasons and the periods down there. So it was very, very limited. So what ended up happening was they had to keep deploying battalions down there because they could only build so long. Then they would have to come back, and they would have to go back down. So now these projects extended out longer and longer and longer in order to keep operations happening there. So finally, after 5 straight years of deep freeze deployment, CBU 201 was disestablished at the end of 1971. During Deep Freeze 72, a regular CB battalion, NMCB 71, which again was here in Davisville, performed the necessary construction and maintenance under the Deep Freeze program. Seabees participated in unit strength, continued for 2 more years until finally ending in 1974. So unit strength would be sending down there approximately 800 to 1,000 men to go down there and perform the construction activities down into Antarctica. They also had personnel back here in the planning stages and the supply stages, making sure all the material was getting down to Antarctica so they could go ahead and perform the missions. So when you look through these different changes, when they started the CB Special, they started Antarctic Support, when they started Unit 202, each time they did that, they were doing major construction down there and revitalizing different bases down there on the ice. In 1975, the mission reduction at the Naval Construction Battalion Center here in Davisville was necessary, caused the necessary transfer of this unit to Port Hueneme, California. And with that being said, thus the large-scale Civil Engineer Corps and CB participation in the bottom of the world came to the end after more than a quarter century of effort of some of the most hostile conditions imaginable. So that falls in suit, if you know anything about the history here of the Seabees and what happened in North Kingstown with the base closures and all that. They downsized, first they closed Quonset in '74, they downsized the mission of Davisville. They sent basically all the active duty units out of Davisville to either Mississippi or Port Hueneme, California. So Antarctic support, CB Lant, and so on and so forth all left here and went to the other construction battalion centers, Mississippi and Port Hueneme. So in '74, when Antarctic support was done, they went to California, then all that support also went on. Anybody else that's in here has any kind of a history buff and knows about that they also supported a specific special air detachment that flew supplies in and out. They had big C-130s with skis on the bottom of them that would fly into Antarctica. Well, that was also a special unit that was formed here and operated out of the Quonset Naval Air Station at that time. And of course, I'm only here to talk about the CB type of stuff because that's my expertise, quote unquote. Just to let you know, I'll give you a little bit of extra information here that talks about Operation Deep Freeze and that actually in 1954 when all this started, and it was within Navy Task Force number 43, it's kind of interesting to get into the facts to know that I want to tell you how many countries were actually involved. And I think it says something like 54 different countries were actually involved in the exploration down in Antarctica. And it didn't matter what your political beliefs were or so on and so forth, or your governmental choices were, all those countries formed together and actually went ahead and did all of the experimentation and testing and all that together as one cohesive unit, and all those other thoughts and theories were all put aside by everybody, and they worked together to do all of that. Geophysics, glaciology, geomorphology, ice cores, ocean and climate systems. This was all done by everybody down on McMurdo Station down in Antarctica. But it was just an amazing fact, and it all started right here at Davisville, and because of the president requesting that this be done to support the scientific exploration, and the task was put on the Seabees and the Civil Engineer Corps, and all done right here in Rhode Island, right out of North Kingstown and Davisville. Does anybody have any questions?
Was there housing there?
Yes, very cold housing. There was housing above ground in Jamesway huts when they first got there, and then they actually built a lot of stuff under the ice. They actually big, huge tunnels and all that stuff. No Quonset huts, though.
You talked about a highway?
Yeah, they built a highway between a couple of the stations that were down there. I don't think it was a big paved asphalt type thing, but it was like a crushed stone type affair, but they built the first big major road. They used to make these big snow trains, they would call them. They had special Caterpillar tractors down there that had extra wide treads. And that's how they would tow equipment that weighed so many tons over the ice, because they wanted to spread the footprint of the tractor and the weight so it wouldn't put that much pressure upon the ice as they were going down there. Commander Urish will speak to you about that. He's going to mention somebody. There used to be a gym named here about an individual that served down on the ice, and he's going to give you a little bit of detail about that. Yes, sir?
You said it was wound down this area in 74, 75, whatever.
Right.
What was the actual reason for that? I have an idea in my head there was a political reason for that. I'm not sure if I'm correct.
I can't attest to the political reason that might be there. I can tell you that probably it forced the Navy to go ahead and back away from doing that, because we were no longer going to support all the scientific exploration anymore. The U.S. wasn't going to bear the burden of the major cost of all that. So I'm sure there was probably some political football being thrown around and things of that nature. So
I think Chafee was Secretary of Defense at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of shocked that happened.
Yeah.
Is why.
Yeah. So that is also the same story that I've heard floating around here on why Quonset was closed and Davisville was downsized. It was a little retribution and things like that because of Mr. Nixon not getting the votes from around here. So I can attest to that. I don't think I was running around the neighborhood back then, but that's the stories I hear anyway. So yeah.
A couple of easy questions, kind of off track here, but what's your funding, or do you have fundraisers? Where do you get your money from to support this?
We have a lot of Seabees that go ahead and send us some funding to support us. We have a lot of battalions that come in here and hold reunions. We have just kind of gotten somebody on staff that has been helping us start to write some grant applications, some donation letters. We've been very fortunate. The to receive some donations from some local unions and things like that. So funds have just started to come in that way, but it's been families that have had parents or grandparents that have served in the Seabees. It's been Seabee veterans themselves that have left money to us or come in and made financial contributions. Seabee Battalion reunion groups, VFWs that have closed down in the state have come here and given us money. So that's what generates our funding. Like I said, we haven't received any federal funding or any major state funding or anything like that.
And then the other one is, again, a little bit off track, but as you know, North Kingstown received the honor of designation for the National Park System as a Heritage World War II town for the state of Rhode Island. And that centered around the contributions of Davisville and Quonset in the successful World War II. And I don't want to sidetrack it too much, but can you give us a nickel tour of that piece of it?
Yes, I can. I provided a whole stack of documents to your organization to apply for that designation. I usually give everybody an hour briefing on all the history of what happened here in North Kingstown at this base and everything involving the Seabees. From the creation of the first group of construction workers or construction battalions, known as the Bobcats, to how the Quonset huts got their names as a derivative of the British Nissen hut, and the first huts being built here, 32,000 of them here in West Davisville, to the creator of our famous Seabee logo was a native Rhode Islander from North Providence, Rhode Island. Mr. Frank Iafredi was created here. Okay. To the Antarctic support, I have Captain Raymond V. Miller's dress uniform. If you look, here's his name, R.V. Miller. He was the guy that built this base, 3,500 acres ahead of schedule, under budget. To all the Seabee battalions that trained here during Vietnam. Admirals' uniforms that had all the play of setting everything up for the first group of Seabees, for the invasion of D-Day. I have the pontoon, the flag, the D-Day map for the first groups that went into Normandy during D-Day. All of those pontoons were tested. How many of you have a boat in Allen's Harbor? That was the Advanced Base Proving Ground. That's where they tested every pontoon. Operation Sock, the top secret airfield that they built out of pontoons and they tested in Narragansett Bay, was right here during World War II. How many people knew about that? How many people in the state of Rhode Island know about that? Okay? Not many. And it's a lot of Rhode Island history. So, I mean, it's just a shame. And thank God that a lot of the North Kingstown middle school students have just started coming. I have a dedicated high school teacher that comes. I've had hundreds of homeschooled children come in here. And the attention span is fantastic. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I mean, I could go on and on.
I know that's a tremendous amount of information there, but it is why we're getting this award.
Yeah. But it's our pleasure. We're glad you all got the recognition, and it makes us feel good that we played a big part in it, plus putting a lot of people to work during those times of coming out of the Depression and things like that. So my early days of working here in the museum and becoming a member of the museum, I got to meet a lot of Seabees that actually worked for the George A. Fuller Company as civilians building this base. And then after working for the George A. Fuller Company, went ahead and joined the Seabees. And Mr. Frank Iafredi was one of those men. He worked in the plan file room, was known as a cartoon character artist, created our logo, later on goes ahead and joins the Seabees and serves in the Pacific Theater in World War II. So there's just so much history I could stand up here and tell you about, and I don't want to put everybody, take away from thunder from anybody else. Yes, ma'am.
A few years back, I was told by the local harbor master that there's a boat down either on Pier 1 or Pier 2 that was at Pearl Harbor that is down on the wharf down there. Do you know anything about that?
I do. And it's not at Pier 1 and Pier 2. The boat belongs to Nick Tanionis, who used to own Specialty Diving. And that boat you're talking about is a tugboat. And it was a tugboat that was at Pearl Harbor during the attack by the Japanese on December 7th. Now, where it is now and what has happened to it, I don't know. I think Nick has sold Specialty Diving because I have retired from Quonset Development, so I'm not in the loop anymore. So I don't know exactly where the tug is and where Nick is. So that's the extent of my intel on that. So, but he did have a World War II Navy tugboat that was at Pearl Harbor.
How did it make it to Quonset?
It was a long voyage. That's all I can tell you. And I'm glad I wasn't on it because I was in the dirt, baby. So I know.
Okay, well, I know we're celebrating
Yeah.
December 7th
Yep.
here, and so I just wondered if there was a tie in there.
I found some documentation. We have a uniform for here for an Admiral John J. Manning. John J. Manning was responsible for all of the construction and the preparation of the D-Day invasion that all the Seabees did. And the Seabees put together all them little steel boxes and made all the rhino ferries, warping tugs, and causeways that were used for the D-Day invasion. John J. Manning is also credited, or hasn't got the official recognition, for designing designing the monument memorial over the battleship Arizona. And his grandson came here probably 3 years ago and brought me 3 footlockers full of his grandfather's memorabilia. And that's how I was able to put the stuff on display here. We have a back room full of hundreds and hundreds of photographs, photo albums, slides from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, that we would love to get scanned, have a big flat screen TV and a little laptop, and you can push the button for D-Day, Guam, Okinawa, Vietnam, Korea, and you'll be able to scroll through these photos. And that's our ultimate goal, to get that done here, let alone me playing around with all the displays that are in here and changing it up. So, but out of Mr. Manning's things, Admiral Manning's artifacts, there was 2 black and white photo albums of all candid photos of him with all the Seabees in England preparing all the invasion equipment. And it's photos I have never seen published anywhere before. So I can't wait to get them up and on the air. Yes, sir.
Did the Seabees decommission the atomic plant when it finished?
Yes, it was disassembled and brought out. Yep. Yep. And if you read further into this, the plant was built in all small pieces because it either had to be put on the cargo ships and brought down or flown down on the aircraft. So it was assembled in pieces like they build those secret boats over there, an electric boat. And it was all assembled together in pieces so they could put it together in pieces and build it on the ice. So. Any other questions? Sick and tired of hearing my propaganda up here? You should come back here and hear my other story. That's a good one, though. Okay, without any further ado, it's my honor and privilege to introduce you to a gentleman here by the name of Commander Daniel Urish. And he has a lot more Seabee history than I do. He was once the commanding officer of Seabee Land, that's Seabees of the Atlantic Fleet. Dan is also responsible for building the chapel in the Pines that was built between 1960 and 1963. He was the OIC of that project, the operations officer. And then Dan was also the officer in charge of the 40th Construction Battalion that went ahead and started construction of the island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, which is now a major operational base that handles everything going on in that theater of operation by Iraq and Afghanistan and so on and so forth. So without further ado, we're going to do a little microphone switch, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Urish. So, thank you.
I'll pick up on a couple of things that from the Antarctic that Jack was talking about. First of all, the question about why didn't the Seabees, well, I'll go back to that political question about why are the Seabees moved from here away back in 1954? Well, the answer is, I think, politics. I was the chief staff officer for Seabee Land, 5 battalions we had here at that time. So very much involved in the justification of why we should stay here. But instead, they sent them down to Gulfport. A part of it, well, a lot of it was politics of and I don't recall his name, very influential senator down in Mississippi. And Mississippi, though, in our argument, had nothing to offer the Seabees as compared to here. We had the port right here to offload Seabees, had an airfield right here to offload Seabees. Gulfport had an airfield close by, but no port nearby, not like us. Besides that, I was also involved in a lot of the operational planning, and we planned for operations in the north, not down in the southern south, which were a lot more difficult. And our argument, though, fell on deaf ears. So I personally hauled the flag down just across the street at Seabee Land and we set up our headquarters down in Little Creek, Virginia in 1974. And that was the end of it, but the politics, I think, did play a very big role in that. Now let me pick up back to the Antarctic. Question on the nuclear power plant. Yeah, I was a part of the disestablishment of that. I was at ComCB and the Commodore sent me down there to check on what they found was a leak at the nuclear power plant in the Antarctic. I went down there, no equipment, no testing, nothing, stupidly. Those are the days that they weren't that concerned about, I guess, nuclear radiation, for at least for guys like me. And the Commodore said, Dan, go down there and check it out, see how bad that leak is. So I did. I came back and, yeah, it ain't good. And the decision was made to pull it out. But it was also an expensive operation. He had to get rid of the disposable material, and the ultimate answer was they evaluated putting it back into operation and decided they'd go back to diesel-fired and regular type operations rather than maintaining the nuclear down there. But that was the end of it. And as I say, you know, I crawled all around that thing, and I'm still okay, I think, more or less. So that was a nuclear power plant. The Seabees, you know, were down there from 55 to 97. They built two of the pole stations down there. The first one, which was basically on the surface of the glaciers, and it, of course, kept moving, but also it kept getting buried. And, you know, by about 1952 or so, it was starting to get crushed by the weight of snow on top of it. So he mentioned 71, Bill Crossan, back in I think 72 or 73, there was a new design for a pole station. It was a huge dome. And inside of it then they would have the cubicles where people lived and operated. And that was a concept. And so I went down there to check the Seabees out and how they were doing and so forth. Actually, I got down there. On the way, one of the planes lost one of the 4 engines. The pilot says, we can't land. We'll never get back out. If we stop, we'll freeze in and we don't have the power to get back out. He says, we're going to set the plane down, but you guys can't get out like we were planning to do. He said, we'll throw everything out the back and out the doors and just keep on moving. So that's what we did. So I got down there, but I never set foot on it. So that was my experience in getting down to the pole station. So that was exciting, but I watched that dead stick all the way back to McMurdo Sound, hoping that there wouldn't be another one go out. So anyhow, that was my fun down there. The handout that I think you've got right now is what I call the Seabee who never came home, Max Keel. The gym was named after Max Keel, but I give you this handout because Max should not be forgotten. Should not be forgotten. You know, he was one of the first ones who arrived in the Antarctic, you know, very first ones. And tragically, he was in the lead dozer, and the dozer went into well, you didn't see the crevices. They were all iced over and snowed over, and he went into a 300-foot deep crevice with the dozer. They tried to get him. A couple of guys went down, tried to get down on ropes, couldn't get down to him. And that was a sad ending. And he's still down there, moving with the glacier, and he'll be young forever at age 22. So, and I give you a picture. This was done later by a Navy artist that went, well, he was down there at the time, I think. He was down there at the time. And this is his rendition of the loss of Max Keel. So remember his name. We don't want to forget somebody who's still down there forever. So that was that for the Antarctic. And as I say, my experience really went back a long time to the Antarctic, as well as, you know, a lot of other places. But yes.
Before you
Well, I didn't decommission. I just gave a report to the Commodore as to.
What happened to the spent fuel rods, you know?
It took, I don't know how the rods themselves came back, but there was a lot of radioactive contamination down there, which took years and expense to get rid of. Not an easy thing. You can't just walk away from it. So it really had an afterlife which was expensive and not great. But it was all removed from the Antarctic. Where did it go? I don't know. But a long way to transport it back wherever it went. And I don't know. I'm looking around. It ain't here. Okay. Well, we talked. Well, Jack has all these wonderful tangibles, you know, remnants of fantastic souvenirs in many cases, and other cases, donations from various sources. These are the tangibles. And what I want to do now is to take you back to a different museum, the Museum of Memory, which is all I have. And so anyhow, and I'd like to pay homage really to three civilian great friends of the Seabees in the old days. And I'm talking about the old days, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, which I experienced. And the three were one that Tim Cranston had commented on, I think in one of his articles a few weeks ago, Bob Bean. The Bob Bean Motel. It was on Boston Neck Road. Now Jiggers 2 is down there, and there's still a hotel down there. But Bob Bean was a great friend of the Seabees. You went there, he could always find a place to put you up while you waited for government housing or for just housing of any kind. And it was tough. You came here with a car and a family packed with kids and stuff in your trunk and no place to live. It was a frequent thing. Bob Bean put us up for a week, for a month, 3 months in some cases. In my case, I think it was about a month or a month and a half to get into government housing. But that was Bob Bean. What really great guy helping Seabees. The second one is Zeke Harris, which is playground is named for Zeke. Zeke was a man with a big heart. And he was the other one that when you got here, they said, go see Zeke, he'll take care of you. We came, you know, we didn't have a lot of money. None of our Seabees had money in the old days, so you didn't have a lot of things to stock the house or quarters when you first got there. They said, go see Bob Bean. He could always find an old piece of used furniture or buy a new one if you wanted to. And that was Bob Bean. He always did it, fair price, and got it to you. And the third one was Ellen Frenchie. And Frenchie was a guy who was always on the dock or the airfield when we left on deployments at night or day, but he was always there when we came back home. And we got off the ship, and he was there waiting with our families with hot coffee and donuts. That was Frenchie, night or day, always there. A great guy. So those are the ones that I wanted to remember with some homage and thanks. Thanks to their spirit. They're all gone now, but they were wonderful people. But the hand, excuse me.
Little effect.
Okay. And, you know, the handout I gave you was Max Keel, one of the first ones in the Antarctic, and tragically, he's still there. So that's my prelude and my sequel to Jack's wonderful talk about the Antarctic. But now what I want to do is to take you back to a land of balmy breezes, waving palm trees, and sweating Seabees. On the early morning of the 20th of May, 1971, I was on a LST, a flat-bottom landing ship with 250 other Seabees on a way to a little island. We'd been actually a day and a half by plane out to a little island on the eastern side of the Indian Ocean, and then on this LST for 6 days at sea. And we got up one morning, and the first thing we saw was just a a thin, dark line on the horizon with a white cloud above it. White clouds above islands in the tropical ocean are fairly good landmark to a ship at sea. And as we got closer, that black mark had palm trees, and we eased closer and went into a narrow entrance into a beautiful, beautiful blue-green lagoon, and disembarked as a ramp came down onto the soft sand. And we were at our home for many months to come. And it was a place with many names and many faces. It was called the Island in the Forgotten Sea, early code name because it was secret, Reindeer Station, called Foot of Freedom at one point, and then the French Creole La Bata, the land out there, and now known as Diego Garcia. This is a Michener story type of like Tales of the South Pacific. The World War II islands that Seabees landed on and built the airfields just like we did. But ours island was also shared with a copra plantation. It was an unspoiled island when we went there, untouched by World War II. The only place in the world that of the islands like that were not modified by World War II. And there was only a copra plantation, coconut husking plantation with 250 souls when we got there. And we were to share this island for the copra plantation for 7 months until the islanders were finally moved off. And we had hundreds of Seabees, the copra plantation, but alas, no pretty nurses like South Pacific. And this was the largest, biggest Seabee construction in history. And it's in the middle of the Indian Ocean on the other side of the world from Rhode Island. But Rhode Island, right here at Davisville, provided all the support. And while the Seabees came from all of the 10 battalions in California, and here, Davisville was the kingpin, the one that coordinated all the operations and coordinated all the supplies with all of the equipment came from here. And our mission there was to build from scratch a communication station, an airfield, and a seaport. And there was no support of any kind in the island. The logistics arrangements were a challenge run by huge computers across the street over at Construction Battalion Center, Davisville. And it was all coordinated, one of the first massive computer programs coordinated by computer remotely. The island is 37 miles long, just a narrow strip of tropical jungle surrounding a beautiful, beautiful lagoon, which was some 13 miles long and 5 miles wide. And it's right by the equator. Temperature was always in the 80s or 90s, humidity always in the 80s. But it was a wind blowing and we got used to it. But that was our tropical atmosphere that the Seabees worked in. But it was a sleepy island with only the copra plantation. And the people there working the plantation had a lifestyle that had not changed for over 100 years. It was, when you went to the plantation side, it was like going back 100 years. Oil lamps at night, some generator for the plantation manager, but everything else was very basic by hand. It was a remarkable experience for us Seabees to be living with the last of the Indian Ocean copra plantations. A very remarkable thing. We provided them medical support, which they never had. We provided them lots of other support, but my arrangements with the plantation manager, Marcel, were keep my Seabees on my side and he'll keep his plantation people on his side, which always wasn't successful. The outrigger canoes would come floating across the lagoon every once in a while up on our beach, and we had a good relationship with them. And sadly, they were departed, though by agreement to make it a completely military operation. But it had been a copra plantation for 250 years, and essentially the same thing, all by hand, picking the coconut, breaking them apart, drying them in the sun, crushing them for the oil. And that was the operation while we were still there. It was all British-owned island, and it was called the British Ocean Territory. It was one of the last of the British territories really in the Indian Ocean area. And so it was really something quite unusual. Technically, we were under the Queen, and I was island commander, and for the time we were there were no British representatives. So I was really basically the authority for the whole island, at the chagrin of some of the Brits who came to visit us on ships. Where's the British commander? He ain't here. There isn't one yet, but he came fortunately after I was there. I was happy that I didn't have anybody like that to contend with, so that was okay. But remarkably, the plantation people still had the French customs. They spoke French Creole. That is, the basic workers did. They were mostly Africans under contract, although they started out as slaves many years ago. But they basically spoke French Creole. And I had some Louisiana French Bayou Seabees who spoke French Creole, and they could talk with them. They were separated halfway around the world and 100 years apart, and they could converse French Creole. Oh, amazing. But during the time I was there, the Cold War was at a peak with the Soviet Union, and we basically had to contend with that. The Soviets really controlled the Indian Ocean at that time. At that time, we had only 2 destroyers based at Bahrain, 2,000 miles away, and the Soviets had 10 ships roaming around the Indian Ocean. And 2 of them surrounded us all the time we were building there before we got the airfield. It was truly a Soviet ocean at that time. Once we got the airfield, things changed. And it now became the key to the Indian Ocean, controlled by the United States for free and safe passage for all the ships of the world. So that's what it is right now. But back to the basic Seabee construction. What we needed for any Seabee construction was, first of all, trained, motivated, healthy Seabees, hopefully happy. And post facto, I've gotten many comments from Seabees who were there who said it was the most meaningful time of my life. They said it was a unique time. They know that now, and they know it's an important time because of the base they built. But at the time, it was hard work, 7 days a week. Well, time off Sunday morning, but 7 days a week, 10 hours, 12 hours a day, all the time. But so the people were very motivated because they knew what it was for, and it was great. But it was a dangerous place, so we had 5 doctors. Besides, the normal battalion would have a dentist and a primary doctor. But besides those, we had an internist, we had an anesthesiologist, and a surgeon, just to eventualities, because there was no way to get anybody off if something serious happened. So we were augmented by this strong medical team. We started off with a phasing of manpower on the island. Since there was nothing there, it started off before I got there with a smaller group of about 35 men who went ashore just over the beach, set up tents, and started out from there with a couple of bulldozers, made some clearings for a camp and so forth. But initially no construction, just trying to get a foothold to set something up, and then gradually it built up, and by the time I was there, I took half of the battalion out with me. And we then ultimately ended up with about 850 men, Navy men on the island. No women at that time. And the second thing was aggregate. And this is another unique thing. To build construction, particularly concrete construction, you have to have strong aggregate. And all of our requirements were to build things according to stateside specifications for permanency. And where did we get the aggregate? Well, we found out that the strongest aggregate, which had to be coral, because that's all the kind of rock we had, was on the outer reef. And so the method we set up was at every low tide, we sent explosives crews out. They drilled down, put the explosives in. The tide came in, we blew the explosives, and then the next low tide sent the dozers and trucks out on the reef, pick it up, bring it back ashore, put it ashore, crushed and processed it. And that's how we got our aggregate for construction. Continuously around the clock, and it was a matter of working with the tide. And that was a technique never done before. The third thing was cement. Cement was brought all the way from Davisville, Rhode Island. And it was in huge bladders, which are about this high, and they were a rubberized fabric of some kind, but they filled them up down here at Davisville, and then sent them by ship all the way out to us, which worked fine for about 5 months, well, I'd say 4 months. And then we got a shipment, and the chief came up to me, he says, the cement is no good. It's all hard in the bladder. We can't use it, can't get it out. And we planned on these phased to come in, and it was useless. Well, the problem was we had the runway, and it was about 3 weeks away from completion and out of cement. So we closed down the other jobs, and the Navy had assigned an LST, a large landing ship tank, and they assigned it, kept it in the lagoon for me to use until we got actually to use for any kind of a emergency, to take people out of the island if we had to, but also somewhat for security, although they never went out and harassed the Soviet ships. But anyhow, I talked to the captain. I said, Captain, we need cement. I want you to go to Mauritius, an island about 1,200 miles away, 5 days sailing, or 4 to 5 days sailing time for the LST. And he said, I told him why, and of course I told my bosses back here that I was doing this because it was taking him away from the island too. And basically, I got my supply officer who had all the money. And in those days, we paid the troops with real money. So we had piles of greenbacks. So I told the supply officer, I want you to fill up a bag with greenbacks. And I think it was about 24 Seabees, and said, I want you to go to Mauritius, buy every bag of cement. And these were, 60-pound bags. And they got every bag they could find on Mauritius, and it took them 10 days round trip. They came back, but they saved a day. We built the airfield 3 days ahead of time. But that was a real difficult problem for a while. And the next thing was really fresh water. This is a little island, and when I first went out there, I was told in my briefings that there was no water supply out there. We're going to give you distillation barges. These are old World War II barges that simply had a distillation unit and oil fired. And that's what we had, which was okay for about 4 months, but these were expeditionary, not intended for long time use. So one by one they went down. And come September, they were both down. Well, fortunately, I had done a master's thesis on island water sources. So I knew there was island water in there. And I did some calculations with 100 inches of rainfall into the sand and said, yes, there's got to be a lot of groundwater in here. So I got my utilities chief and I said, let's dig a hole. and picked the best possible site. He dug a hole down about 8-10 feet down to the water table, tested, yep, it's fresh water, got the medics to check it out. The water was safe to drink. It was away from the camp, safe to drink. It smelled though. So with aeration though, the smell of hydrogen sulfide dissipated. It was old vegetation that would cause this. So we started pumping it in to tanks, and that became our emergency water supply. We got the barges back up, but that was a backup water supply, and it still is today. Now they've got over 100 wells, shallow wells, only tapping the top of the fresh water, and that's their supply today. And it supplies up to 3,000 people. In fact, at one time during the Gulf Wars, 10,000 people. So they found out with geophysical exploration later by a scientific group that there's about 100 feet of fresh water floating on salt water underneath the sand, and that's what we tapped into. So it worked, and we saved the day. We had lots of Narragansett beer, but we were running out of fresh water. So that was a pretty serious, in fact, I'd say it's the most serious problem in the deployment. You don't want to run out of fresh water, drinking water. The runway, as I said, was finished on 15 July, about 3 days ahead of schedule. It was 3,500 feet long of compacted coral. Now it's some 10,000 feet long of reinforced concrete. Can handle anything in the world, any plane. So it's morphed with all of the Seabee deployments over the years into a major runway. But for us, it was one that worked, but it was only 3,500 feet, now buried underneath this new runway. The initial problem though, was that planes couldn't find our island. We were assigned support from Utapao, Thailand. It was a 10-hour flight for aircraft over trackless ocean. And the pilots were assigned to fly out there to support us every week. It took 3 planes to finally find the island for the first time. The pilots, we still had Vietnam going. Cold War, but Vietnam was still much underway. In fact, our battalion had a unit still in Vietcong in the Mekong Delta, fighting, winning the hearts and minds of the people, but under attack by the Viet Cong, and I not lost, but 3 of them were wounded, and we had to pull them out. But basically, these pilots were Vietnam pilots, following land of sight, coastlines, rivers, line of sight, and they'd lost their navigation skills over trackless ocean. So they had a hard time finding the island, and the first 2 planes reached the point of no return and turned back. So it was, even after we got the airfield done, it was several days before we finally got a plane in there. And
they didn't have electronic navigation or beacons from the island? Or
they could only find us with what we had. They had to be within about 15 miles to pick us up. It was, yeah. Our navigation aids were very minimal at that time. Well, the comm station, I mentioned that the comm station was our first priority, and that was finished really within a month after the first Seabee went ashore. But what do we use for an antenna? The tallest coconut tree we could find, about 80 feet tall. We put the antenna up there, and the comm people went on, and they sent out a message. The response they got was from a ship in the Philippines. They said, "We got it. We now have communications." But before that was a dead zone for all Navy ships, our Navy ships. They couldn't talk to anybody once they were in the middle of the ocean. There was no satellites, none of that stuff at this time. So that was a big accomplishment right to start. And as I said, the plantation was closed, and it was sad because I I felt so sorry for the plantation people. It was been their home for generations. But they were moved off the island, and we lowered the British colors down on the plantation and put them up the next day at the Seabee camp, and that was the end of that. I did get back to the island in 2014, sort of a Rip Van Winkle sleep of 43 years for me. More than Rip Van Winkle. And amazing, you know, from the just basic coral roads and huts, and we were still used tents for all of our support activities, a big mess tent for our meals. It was all, when I was there, that's what it was. But now, beautiful, beautiful, modern little city. In fact, you know, the best I've seen in any of my military establishments that I've seen during 25 years in the Navy. It really is, it's well maintained. Of course, it's a tight little community, so it's well controlled, but different from us. Instead of the sweating, smelly Seabees walking down the coral road, now it's all paved road, sidewalks, and women, girls walking down the road. Completely different. And so, and the facilities are like the best motel facilities. You know, running water inside, toilets inside, not the outside two-holers that we had. You could shower inside. We had cold water showers out of a tank hanging up on some stilts to shower with. It was a lot different. And what is it now? Well, in 2022, the International Court of Justice determined that the Chagos Archipelago, which was the big group of islands in the central Indian Ocean that Britain had held on to, including Diego Garcia, should not have been excluded when the mother island of Mauritius was giving independence. Now, Mauritius is a large island, but on the far western side of Diego Garcia. And the island really, the Chagos Archipelago, was excluded from this when the Brits gave Mauritius its independence. But the International Court said, you shouldn't have done that, Britain. It wasn't legal. So they said, give it back. Well, the Brits have been arguing this really for us for the last 2 years, but just October, just a month ago, Britain agreed to give sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to the island nation of Mauritius. It's 1,000 miles away, but they will have control over the Chagos, with the exception of Diego Garcia. I haven't seen the agreement, but as I understand it, the agreement excludes Diego Garcia and continues to give us the rights, and the British the rights, to maintain sovereignty over that island and to keep our base there. So it's an important one. It's the key to the Indian Ocean. The concern I have, though, is that the rest of the Chagos is not under our control. The Chinese are all in the peripheral area, and I feel that they will start to make bases and inroads into the Chagos to counter us at Diego Garcia. So we'll wait and see, but my concern is that now it no longer has the protection that we had when the Chagos was really under total British and our control. And that's the status today. So we'll have to wait and see, but it's still an incredibly important base. Thank you very much. If you have a minute for questions, or I have a couple of minutes if you have any questions.
So, with all the improvements that have been made in Diego Garcia, and the nice hotel, and the streets, and the sidewalks, has that all been done by Seabees, or is there a different operation now?
Well, it was, I'd say the permanent construction was mostly done by Seabees. The Seabees, though, let's see, the Seabees were there all the way through 70, no, I'd say 80s. I think for about 20 years, the Seabees were there with multiple deployments, and we did most of the permanent construction that we have now. The maintenance, though, and all the continuing construction, particularly the port facilities and all of the major airfield facilities are not done by contractor. The Seabees have small detachments out there, but no large many hundred Seabees at a time the way we had before. It's really reverted pretty much to contractor support and contractor construction. And one more thing about what else is there. During the Gulf War, we had actually Air Force brought in about 4,000 men as support men and pilots for aviation units that were coming all the way from the United States and then picking up their bombs at Diego Garcia and going on to the Middle East. And this was a major support operation for the Middle East and would be again. Are they doing anything now? I'm not sure what their operation is. It's all very secret. You can't get there to find out. And there are very few reports that you can see coming from the island. But it's not only got the support for major air operations, for the operations in the Middle East, but it also has within the lagoon about 20 pre-positioned ships. These ships are loaded with ammunition, tanks, and equipment. And the mission is to deploy on a moment's notice to meet the Marines or the Army at another assigned place on the peripheral area of the Indian Ocean. But all the support is already out there, and these ships are ready to go to support our operations any place on the peripheral area of the Indian Ocean. And it's interesting because they go in and out, they practice their in and out. They're at anchor and they can slip the anchor at a moment's notice and take off. But they also practice getting in it, and of course all this stuff has to be maintained. So it's a big operation to keep that. We also have nuclear submarines there. And the nuclear submarines, they're now home ported there. There are about, I'm just guessing now, there are probably about 6 or 8 of those, a large part of our nuclear fleet in the China and Indian Ocean. And when I was there, these submarines are going in and out every day on patrol. But the channel is narrow, so they're always guided by a tug on both sides. It's a very delicate operation for a submarine moving in and out of that little entranceway into the lagoon. But that's there. So it's as I say, it's a powerful and very important military establishment for us that we're not going to give up. Thank you. Oh, actually, this is a little book that I wrote about 8 years ago. There is a copy, or there are copies in local libraries around here too. I don't know if Jack has any left.
Well, we don't have any left for sale. They've all sold out, but we have one on our...
Okay, yeah. So this will tell you a lot more about Diego Garcia, at least in the old days.
Dan also did the, familiar with the markers in town, the one over by the Deerfield Elementary School. Dan did the artwork on that for the Town of North Kingstown. And he also did the illustrations, all the paintings that are in this book as well. He's got a fair number of talents. When he retired from the Seabees, he went back to get his PhD in engineering at the University of Rhode Island and became a full professor there, and eventually the head of the department. So you've seen a person who's done some incredible things in his life, and great things for the community, great things for the First Baptist Church. I'm proud to call her my friend.
Thank you, Mike.